Brown bears can get pretty big, but since they can be found on multiple parts of the planet and have a variety of subspecies, which one is the largest? Probably the Kodiak. But why is it so big? Food. Living on Kodiak Island gives them easy access to salmon year-round, and this seems to be how they can attain such large sizes. But what sizes are they? Just how large do these giants get? And what about the other large species of brown bears that rival the Kodiak? I do want to add a little bit of background and some sources for the Kodiaks though. It does seem that a lot of sources that I've seen, like Alaska Department of Fish and Game, Britannica, Nat Geo, and books like Mammals of North America, suggest that Kodiaks tip the scale. But what actual measurements are we talking about? And are we sure none of the other brown bears might be just as big? There are a lot of claims that would seem to suggest just that. Now obviously there are multiple subspecies of brown bears. In fact, brown bears seem to have the widest range of all the bears being found around the world. Not going to look at every subspecies. The YouTube channel Suki has a pretty good video for that, but I want to focus on some of the bigger ones. Let's start in Europe with the aptly named Eurasian brown bear. The largest on record apparently came from Romania. According to Wild Transylvania, the record holder was a male that weighed 480 kilos, or 1,058 pounds. Bearconservation.org gives a similar weight with a length of almost 2.5 meters, 8.2 feet. But I was curious about what bear specifically these measurements came from. A search for largest or large bears from Romania will generally yield a tragic story from just a few years ago about a bear that was shot in a protected area. Apparently, an Austrian prince had been given a special permit to shoot a female bear that had been damaging farms. However, the prince shot another bear named Arthur, a 17-year-old male that hadn't been attacking any farms. There was some controversy and debate about whether or not it was an accident, with one wildlife ranger saying, quote, "I wonder how the prince could confuse a female bear coming to the village with the largest male that existed in the depths of the forest." And it was clear that the prince did not come to solve the problem of the locals, but to kill the bear and take home the biggest trophy to hang it on the wall. I don't know. But many headlines say Arthur was the largest bear in Europe, or some say in the EU. Was Arthur the 480 kilo bear? Well, perhaps not. It's hard to find a weight measurement on Arthur. It seems that sometimes trophy hunting systems use different scales. On an article in the Irish Examiner, Richard Collins wrote, quote, "According to reports, his corpse scored 593 points out of 600. The maximum possible under trophy hunting classification system. With over 5,000 bears in the Carpathians and even larger members in Russia, it seems unlikely that Arthur was the biggest European specimen. 593 out of 600 seems fairly high though." The same author also writes that members of the Eastern European population, to which Arthur belonged, tipped the scales at 480 kilos occasionally. Now, why would he write that if there wasn't already a bear on record at 480 kilos? So maybe Arthur wasn't 480, but there is that number again. It seems it may go back to the Guinness Book of Animal Facts and Feats from the 80s. Which isn't my favorite source, but considering there are bigger recorded brown bears around the globe, maybe it's not too bad. Let's go east and go bigger. The Kamchatka brown bear seems to be considered the largest brown bear of Eurasia. In the journal Arctic Institute of North America, author Robert Rausch wrote an article titled "On the Status of Some Arctic Mammals," and he said that the Kamchatka bear, quote, "attains the largest size of any Eurasian form of Euarctos," and that the bear attains a weight of 560 kilos in winter. To be fair, this is an older article. Some newer sources, such as Anomalia, state up to at least 650 kilos, so that's 1,430 pounds. It also claims a body length of 2.4 meters, 7.9 feet, to 3 meters, 9.8 feet. And it also states that it's almost as big as a Kodiak bear. Not to spoil anything, but assuming these numbers are correct, this is getting close to some Kodiak sizes. I even read some hunter testimonies saying that they shot 10-foot long bears. When you look at a place like the Kamchatka Peninsula, it is reasonably easy to see how it would be an environment set up to make some big bears. On the peninsula, they would have access to a variety of food, such as fish, similar to the Kodiak. There's even a paper in the 90s that suggests the Kodiak bears originally came from Kamchatka, a southern migration of broad-skulled bears from Kamchatka to the Alaskan Peninsula. But all that info is all well and good. But were these bears really weighed at 650 kilos or 1,430 pounds? Well, trying to look into it a little more, I found an article on the Russian Geographical Society from 2021 that is titled, "For the first time in the world, body weight of wild brown bear to be reliably determined on Kamchatka." They state that, quote, "Despite the widespread information about the body weight of Kamchatka bears, it is often expert approximations. There are very, very few instances of direct weighing of the animals. Now we can expect reliable data on the weight of the bears of southern Kamchatka, where the largest specimens on the peninsula and some of the largest within the world range." So the team hopes to rectify the lack of data with regards to actual weights. They plan to have a platform scale attached to a camera. The platform was installed on a trail that leads to a salmon spawning area at the mouth of the Kakatsin River. However, though this article was from 2021, I haven't managed to find an update. There doesn't seem to be a follow-up on the Russian Geographical Society, and when I search for some of the names of the people involved, I haven't found a paper or article on this yet. Now that could be that they're still working on it, or it could be that it's just somewhere I haven't found it. But it is a cool idea for getting some good weight readings. The team also said that estimates have gone up to 600 kilos or 1,323 pounds. So is that an achievable weight for these bears? Possibly, but the plot thickens. So I wanted to also look into another brown bear found in Russia, the Ussuri brown bear. It's also found in China, North Korea, and Hokkaido in Japan. The thing is, I first read this subspecies was smaller than the Kamchatka brown bear. Okay, but then I also read that the Ussuri brown bear could rival a Kodiak bear in terms of size. Well, hold on. If it's almost the size of a Kodiak, but also significantly smaller than a Kamchatka brown bear, which is also smaller than a Kodiak? What's going on here? Well, there might be some exaggerations. Apparently, an NHK program aired in Japan titled Landscapes of Earth that stated the brown bears in Kamchatka were twice that of the brown bears in Hokkaido, aka the Ussuri brown bear, or Higuma. However, some took issue with this. There was a site in Japan that makes note of the fact that when you look at records of weights from Russian hunters in the past, weights of Kamchatka bears, they max out at about 490 kilos or 1,080 pounds. And that's an estimate. And this seems to be gathered by the scientist Ognev in 1931 and also restated by Stroganov in 1969. A hunter did claim to have shot a bear that was 655 kilos, 1,444 pounds. However, neither of the two scientists mentioned this bear, even though he was shot before either of their papers came out. In fact, another scientist named Bromley wrote a 1965 paper called Bears in the Southern Far East of the Soviet Union, where he questioned the claims that any bear over 480 kilos 1,058 pounds, since the weights aren't measured and usually estimated by eye. Though if 480 kilos is accurate, it seems like it would be somewhat larger than the larger brown bears of Japan. The famous killer bear, Keisagake, was apparently weighed at 380 kilos, or 840 pounds, though another bear caught in Hokkaido in 2015 was 400 kilos, or 882 pounds. So I guess the Kamchatka bears are bigger, though based on estimates, But there are two other things. One, this makes me very suspicious of the claim that the Eurasian brown bear gets to 480 kilos, which is a bit suspect considering it's supposed to be the smallest of the three. I mean, either they are not that much smaller than the Kamchatka and Ussuri bears, or they are significantly smaller and their size has been exaggerated. Or maybe someone used the wrong brown bear weight and others ran with it. And two, even if the Kamchatka bear is bigger, still not really all that close to the Kodiak sizes with 480 kilos. At least not the biggest ones. If we take the more conservative estimates, we're not all that close to the record for biggest brown bear. But then why did I say some sources seem to suggest they are close in size? Well, it's time to talk about bear skulls. In the 1988 book Mammals of the Soviet Union, on page 649, when referring to the bear skulls in the far east of the Soviet Union, it states, "The largest skull of the described form by Ognev, 1931, is only slightly less than the maximum size of the world record from Alaska." If we take into consideration that in our country up to now, records are not given any attention and the hunters and especially traders do not generally collect skulls as trophies, it is possible, perhaps, to consider that animals of the described form, and also Kamchatka, attain dimensions of large bears of America. Interesting stuff, but here's the rub. The thing is, almost every time I look into one of these brown bear subspecies, sites come up that offer trophy hunting tours for these bears. Trophy hunting isn't something I'm into, but I thought, well, at least there must be a bunch of records about how big these bears can get, especially when you consider trophy hunters want the biggest trophy. But it's not as simple as that. One of the more common trophy hunting measurement systems for bears is the Boone and Crockett Club, or B&C, which focuses on the bear's skull size, specifically the length and width. The skull is measured and points are awarded based on the dimensions. So usually you get skull measurements rather than length or weight. I would have thought that this was due to the fact that it's difficult to weigh a large animal, but apparently it's more about standardizing the measurements. So maybe we could put those numbers, as in the skull measurements, into a formula and it would give us some rough idea about the length and weight. But apparently that doesn't work either. There is an interesting post on Github where authors Mitch and Sam and Tucker, specifically Samantha Widman, tried to do something like this, or quote, "In the bear's problem, I was assigned to compute a formula that would approximate a bear's weight given specific dimensions, length, head width, chest circumference, and neck circumference. When it came to neck circumference, chest circumference, and overall length, these seem to be good indicators of weight to varying degrees. However, when it came to weight in relation to head length, they found, quote, "The weight versus the head length of a bear appears to have a scattered relationship. While the plot has some structure to it, it was not enough to convince me that head length was the best measurement to compare the weight to. And when it came to weight versus head width, quote, there is little to no correlation between the weight and head width of a bear. This goes to show that using the head width to determine the weight of a bear is not recommended." So while big skulls probably indicate big bears, it would seem that it might not be enough to get an accurate weight measurements, although maybe some better formulas will come out over time. This would also lead us into the East Siberian brown bear. According to Mammals of the Soviet Union, these were the other bear skulls that also seemed very big in the USSR. If you watch videos on brown bears, you will often hear that the Eastern Siberian bear is in between the size of a Eurasian bear and a Kamchatka bear. Sounds logical, I suppose. With a wide range, they may have populations that can rely on a large and steady food source from coastal areas. There doesn't seem to be much data out there on their weight, so I wouldn't say for certain they are in between. Perhaps some are even as big as the Kamchatka bears, but since they don't come up as much as Kodiak rivals, at least as far as I've seen, maybe we don't have to worry about them too much right now. Let's just move on to North America. I probably have to give an honorable mention to grizzlies. I used to think that all brown bears in North America were just grizzlies, and sometimes people do just call all the brown bears grizzlies. But technically, the grizzly and the Kodiak are classified as separate subspecies. Grizzly bears are Ursus arctos horribilis, and Kodiak bears are Ursus arctos middendorfi. Grizzly bears don't seem to be as large, again, due to them generally, not always, being found more inland and having less access to a large quantity of food. I've heard, and probably you've heard, that this makes grizzlies more aggressive towards humans. I don't know if I necessarily believe that though. I mean, maybe it is true, but how is that tested? How is it measured? More grizzly attacks on record than Kodiak attacks? I mean, okay, but there are an estimated 30,000 grizzlies in Alaska, 16,000 grizzlies in Canada, and 1,000 grizzlies in the lower 48. In contrast, according to Alaska Fish and Game, there are 3,500 Kodiak bears. Also, grizzlies are more spread out across North America, and Kodiaks live exclusively on the islands in, well, the Kodiak archipelago. And if we look at an article published in Nature called Brown Bear Attacks on Humans, a Worldwide Perspective, you can see from the chart that the main reasons behind attacks are females with cubs, and then sudden encounters, and then dog presence scenario, and then wounded bear, and then, at the very bottom, predatory. I can understand an animal more desperate for food might be more likely to eat me, but the biggest factor that will cause a bear to be aggressive to a human seems to be if a female encounters a human and feels the need to defend her cubs. So a grizzly sow might get pretty annoyed if I started strolling up to her with her cubs, but I doubt the larger Kodiak sow would be completely fine with it. Anyway, size estimates for grizzlies are much lighter than ones in the Far East. The National Wildlife Federation states males weigh upward of 700 pounds, which is 317 kilos. Some larger ones have been recorded. The famous grizzly 566 weighed 712 pounds, or 323 kilos, and there's only been one other bear in Yellowstone that was heavier, the 715-pound male in 1977. So 715 pounds is about 324 kilos. Still pretty big, though there are other record-breaking grizzlies listed on trophy hunting sites, but the records come from their skull measurements, and I can't see if their weights are recorded. But of course, just with like other brown bears, we also have to acknowledge that grizzlies in different areas do seem to be bigger. There are grizzlies that aren't Kodiaks that live on the Alaskan Peninsula that also seem to get very large, that, quote, rival the Kodiak. Again, they aren't Kodiaks, but they are similar. In fact, they are considered by some as their own subspecies, Ursus arctos gaius, though not everyone agrees on that. Again, their diet consists of a lot of salmon, which helps them get big. I've seen claims of 500 kilos or 1,102 pounds, which isn't that extreme to me, but I have seen some one-off, very extreme claims. If we go to that Guinness Book of Animal Facts and Feats in the 1980s, there is a part that describes a bear shot in Cold Bay by Robert C. Reeve with a weight estimate at 16 to 1,700 pounds. So that's 726 to 771 kilos. Reeve said the bear had no fat, that it was just out of hibernation, and that it could and would have been 1,850 pounds or 839 kilos. The evidence? Well, a photograph. The bear was never weighed. The issue I have with that is that if you look at a lot of trophy hunting sites, you see a lot of forced perspective. It's used to make an admittedly big bear seem like a supergiant bear, close to the thumbnail size. It wasn't just clickbait. No, it was. I will say the Animal Facts and Feats book is actually much better than I thought it would be, and the author always seems to give a source for the size of the bear rather than just giving a generalization. I'm just a bit skeptical on this one because, as the author admits, it's all based on the photograph and the testimony of the man who estimated the size. Onto the Kodiak, the brown bear that all other brown bears aspire to be. With so many claims about size and all the different ways to actually measure, do we just have some actual records for the Kodiak? Actually, finally, yes. In 1894, J.C. Tolman shot a Kodiak bear at English Bay on Kodiak Island that weighed 1,656 pounds, or 751 kilos, and its stretched skin was 13 feet 6 inches, or 4.11 meters. Exact formulas to determine its standing height based off of that are hard to come by, but I've been told stretched hide is 25% longer than standing height, so maybe this bear was around 10 feet. Maybe a bit more, so over 3 meters tall when standing. I've seen this information on a few websites, but it seems it originally came from the book Animal Facts and Feats by Gerard Wood. Since the account comes from over 100 years ago, part of me is a little bit afraid that maybe this bear wasn't actually measured correctly, but we have more measurements. The biologist Willard A. Troyer also weighed a number of Kodiaks, and 4 males that he weighed between 960 to 1,346 pounds in the fall, so up to 610 kilos. Though he also states that, quote, some exceptional specimens approaching 1,500 pounds, which is 680 kilos. And then there was also the biologist Vic Barnes, who wanted to know how big Kodiaks got, and he went to measure some, and the biggest he measured was 1,519 pounds, almost 690 kilos. It's not quite the 750 kilos, but if they can get the 690, 700 doesn't seem too impossible, especially when that would just mean eating a lot more food. But either way, when we look at measurements like this and actual measurements, it puts the Kodiak clearly in the spot of the largest brown bear. A few quick points to clear up. 1, yes, we are trying to look at bears during seasons when they are the heaviest, so the weights for these Kodiaks are generally taken in fall. 2, these are the wild Kodiaks. A few in zoos have vastly exceeded 2,000 pounds, but I don't know if we should count them, since if they're in captivity, they were probably getting overfed to reach that size, or at least that's probably not something attainable in the wild. And 3, I'm not saying that other brown bears can't and never will achieve Kodiak size. Maybe they will, maybe they already have. The Kamchatka bear is closely related, and populations may have access to an abundance of food. I'm just saying it seems a little bit more on the hypothetical and anecdotal side right now. Perhaps the Kodiaks being isolated for thousands of years also gave them a bit of an edge, but maybe we'll see some 700 kilo Kamchatka bears weighed soon. And lastly, here's the controversial question. When it comes to Kodiaks, are they the biggest bears overall in the world? Well, if we go even further north, there are other bears that want that title, and this has been a topic of debate, but it's also a topic for another video, so let me know if you want me to make that one. Anyway, thank you to my wonderful members and patrons, and thank you for listening to me rant and ramble about bear sizes for more than 20 minutes.